Welcome to Killer Women with your host, bestselling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Beezy Marsh. Beezy is an international #1 and Sunday Times top 10 bestselling author who believes that ordinary lives are extraordinary. She is also an award-winning journalist who has spent more than 20 years making the headlines in newspapers including the Daily Mail and the Sunday Times. Beezy is married with 2 young sons and lives in Oxfordshire. Did I do that right? With a never-ending pile of laundry. I love that. I know that feeling. Welcome, Beezy.
Oh, thank you for having me, Danielle. This is so exciting. I am really thrilled to be on the Killer Women podcast.
Thank you. Well, it's so fun. And first of all, I love this cover, this Queen of Clubs. And this is the second book in the Queen of Thieves series, or the Queen of Thieves is the first book. So tell us about the series, because I think once you read this one, you'll want to have read the last one. So maybe we start with Queen of Thieves. And then also tell us about this book in particular.
Great. Okay, so this is part of the Queen of Thieves trilogy, and it features this really feisty, daring group of female thieves. It's like the real Peaky Blinders of London. And the best bit is these women really existed. So I've taken inspiration from real life, these real badass girls, and created this fictional story set around the early 20th century, which was when they were in their heyday, at the height of their criminal antics. And they were bad girls. They were violent. They carried razor blades in their handbags, and they were determined to carve a path in gangland, which was a male dominated world, and make it their own. And in fact, they did. So Queen of Thieves is the first book in the series, and is set just after the Second World War, which I thought was quite an interesting time because we kind of won the war, but Britain was broke. People didn't have a lot of money. And what these girls do is they stole high-end goods like furs and silk stockings and jewels, things that everyday women couldn't afford. And they sold them on to women in their kind of communities. That was their unique selling point, their USP. And then Queen of Clubs, I take them into the 1950s, which is like a richer decade. Britain had more money. Everyone had more money. The world was changing. People were hungrier, if you like, for money, for wealth. And they moved into kind of clubland. So they started running nightclubs. So I loved that seedy underbelly, which is like a kind of rich seam, if you like, to kind of mine for plot and character. So that's how that came about. Yeah.
Well, it is so fun. And there's this sense that, the end of the war, the end of Prohibition, did you have Prohibition? Was there?
We never did here, but we did have a kind of depression. So people couldn't really afford a lot of drink, I think, in the kind of 30s, the 1930s. Yeah, we didn't get Prohibition, but.
Why would I have assumed that? Yes, I'm glad I caught myself. But yeah, but there is that sense of like you said, like the hunger and a greed for experience and for life after all those years, really, during the war when London was very much shut down and shuttered and had to be people, lived inside. And there's a real duality here, right? You've got the people with money, and then you still got people very much, living under the thumb of these sort of brutal landlords, which is, you have those people in this book as well, and trying to make it. Talk about these women who thieve. Talk about their outfits, because I absolutely love the detail of how they get away with this. So fabulous.
And that's real. Yeah. So basically, in the research for this book, I met some of the granddaughters of the original gang, the people that I'm kind of basing my characters on. And one of the most hilarious things was they said to me, they explained, they wore these bloomers that were like elasticated at the knee, usually made of silk or a kind of silky fabric, because that was easy to slip the goods down. So they'd wear a baggy waistband on their skirt, these massive knickers, and they'd like literally shove the stolen goods down their knickers and like run out of the store. So they maybe like attack the security guard or just make a run for it. They had secret adapted pockets inside coats. They would hide things. They'd maybe put the hair up like this and be able to like hide, maybe put jewels in their hair. They put money in their hair, certainly. They used like a fur muff and throw things inside there. Handbags, big capacious handbags, sweet things in there. So they dressed really like they were posh. It was called putting on the posh. So they dressed like wealthy women. So they were passing themselves off as being from the upper classes. That real class divide in Britain, you know, very much of its time. And these were slum girls. So they pretended to be posh so that they could get into the stores. They'd get served. They'd usually go in groups of 2 or 3, have a little gaggle around, I don't know, a dress stall or some drawers or something, and then kind of pinch what they were after and then make a run for it. Or they'd do like bag swaps in the hallways.
Right. I love that. And then somebody's looking for the one bag that they thought something was in, and meanwhile that bag is an identical bag is with somebody else. I love that they make carpet bags and and I love the idea of those of the knickers with the bloomers with the tight waist the tight bands around their thighs. So you have these things like around your legs, but no, they wouldn't slip out. It's really fun. I mean, it is such a sort of, like you said, a rich time frame for this kind of thing. And I love these feisty women. So you say one of the things you mentioned in a bio that I read of you is that your families and relationships are at the heart of your writing. So let's talk about these, because there's this sort of extended family that centers in this book. So tell us a little bit about them, right?
Okay. Without spoilers, because you've basically got Alice Diamond was the first Queen of Thieves, and then you've got this younger girl, Nell Kane, again a slum girl, who kind of comes into the gang, and in the first book she rises up the ranks. I'm not going to say exactly what happens, but basically, so you've got these two women who are kind of enemies with each other, and then Nell has got her partner Jimmy, who she's kind of living in sin, which is a little bit edgy of the time. She's had a baby, but she's not married to him. And so basically it's about her, that sort of tension of the family life and being a matriarch. She's a matriarch of gangland. She's running the nightclubs. And then on the other side, you've got the kind of Alice Diamond might or might not be there in the background. What's she going to do? And it's very much kind of how, well, things go wrong quite quickly for Nell and Jimmy, and their perfect life kind of falls apart. So it's that bit of, I don't want to kind of give things away, but there's this other girl, this dancer, Zoe, who's this kind of cuckoo in the nest. She's a problem girl. She's a bomb site kid. She's a dancer. She wants to get rich. She comes in and, the perfect marriage or the perfect relationship kind of goes off the rails.
She upsets the boat. Well, and the thing that's fun about Zoe is that she was sent away during the war and ended up sort of being raised by a family that was very, like, her elocution was very important. So she learned to have this very sort of posh accent, and so she sounds like she's a wealthy girl, even though, as you said, she's not.
Exactly.
And so she plays that to her advantage. One of the things I love about Nell, we'll go back to who's now she's the queen of clubs, or she's the new Queen of Thieves, if you will, for the moment. And one thing I love about her is that she doesn't want to get married. Jimmy keeps asking, and she, it's this idea that if she gets married, then there's this it's shift, and it's true, right? I mean, you're married, I'm married. It's that changes the dynamic of being independent in some way that is more, even today, right? It's a little bit more profound for the female, I think, than it is for the man, right? And she does not want that. And yet she has a daughter, Ruby, who, is her, and she feels there's just like a modern working woman, there's this push-pull between wanting to run this incredible business and be this strong woman and be feisty and be independent, and yet also wanting to be the mother that is there for her child. And that is a tension that this is the 1950s, but it's a tension we still experience, 75 years later, right?
Totally. I really wanted to bring that out. And it's so interesting that you touch on that, because that tension of, when you think about the 1950s, like my grandma's era, you might think it was all lovely, but it was really hard for women. And now it's even harder because she's on the wrong side of the law. But I like the idea that this bad woman, this kind of woman who's violent when she needs to be, she's a criminal, she's been in prison, but she still has this emotional life. And she's got the tension with Jimmy, the exactly wanting to be the mother, wanting to be the loving mother, but trying to be the matriarch of crime, trying to be the queen of clubs at the same time. And in that tension, in that space, things fracture. But that's where you get good drama, right?
Yes.
That's where that comes from.
Yes, and
those tensions,
and we feel the tension of just the dynamic between her, her working life and her home life. But then, like you said, it's on steroids, because her working life is very much going to put her, in jeopardy for even just freedom, right? And then on top of it, like, if you imagine it's like we think about mobsters and their children, right? Ruby is in this place where she could very much be, it's very dangerous, and so
it's dangerous for her.
It's dangerous for her. And thinking about, as a mother, your child being in danger because something you do, of course, is the ultimate, risk. And I mean, it's terrifying. So I love that. And I love the idea that we also talk about, there's a shift. You mentioned this that there's a shift in young people at this time, right? I mean, there is this people, they are questioning authority. And we see this in Zoe very much, right? She's the young character there, which that's something that would have been unthinkable. And I wonder why that is. Like, is it because the end of the war? Is it, what do you think, what created this change in young people?
Yeah, I really think you've put your finger on that there. I call her a bomb site kid, because, London was bombed to pieces. So the kids that were around were kind of like growing up on bomb sites, like playing on bomb sites. But they were kind of hungry for change. They had enough of being deprived. And I mean, part of it was the influence actually of the United States. We've got the rock and roll music coming. That was a key time in Britain at that time, particularly London and Soho. I mean, I know that because my mom was a teenager in that time in Soho, in London, and she was hanging out in Soho and going to all these nightclubs and haunts and doing the jazz music and the rock and roll. So I think they wanted to be different from their parents. They didn't want to just go through school, go work in a factory, put on the same drab, let's face it, outfit. And teenagers were kind of invented. And Zoe is part of that hungry, I want the glitz, I want the glamour. And I mean, there's a tension there, because all that glitters is not gold. And as the book says, the life of luxury comes at a price. And girls like Zoe were up for being they were exploited. Where you've got nightclubs, you've got vice, you've got sex, you've got that kind of exploitation. And Zoe is ripe for that. Unfortunately, she's a good-looking young woman, and a part of it is she's knowingly out to try and kind of get what she can, but the other side is she's exploited. And I really, that for me was the dirty underbelly, if you like, the flip side of this glamorous, fabulous, energetic 1950s for young people was, whoa, hang on, you could go a bit too far here, and then what will happen to you? And exploitation.
And it's not different today, right? It's like where there are, like you said, where there are dancers, where there's, where women are put in small outfits and paraded around, on the arm of a wealthy man, or on a stage or anything. There's also the exploitation that hasn't changed, which is interesting. So the theme of these feisty women, which you so explore, and there's something really, it's going to sound funny, but inspirational about these women who were making a place for themselves in a time when, there wasn't really a place for them. It's certainly not in, like you said, I mean, it's a man's world. It's a man's world everywhere, but particularly in crime, right? I mean, men are stronger. They are, they get off easier. Women we expect nothing from women. They're not that smart. They're not very strong. They're just, their boobs and whatever, and that's
Yeah.
it. So, what, like, I feel like that's sort of a role model for us, not the crying part so much as
No,
the,
but yeah.
right? Like, talk about, why that was fun to write. I mean,
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, firstly, actually, these women are still talked about
yeah,
around in gangland circles, which I kind of got to know through the research for these books. It's like they're kind of slightly reverential about, oh, I knew Alice Diamond, or my nan worked with one of the 40 thieves. And these women that were like, they took on the men, they would fight like men. Actually, they
yeah,
were violent, which is not good, but they sort of had to fight their way and carve their path. And I saw that immediately that I learned about these women. I thought, this is a story to be told. It's like the mafia, but it's kind of more interesting because they are trying to maybe have babies, boyfriends, their
right.
sisters. You've got female camaraderie as well. The fact they came together as an all-female group of badass women is unusual, and that was reflected as well in the interest of the time. So there's newspaper articles I was able to find where they're kind of almost like, they would be like Instagram stars today. That's the nearest thing I can say. The
Right.
journalists were like getting really excited every time these girls were in court. It was like the Queen of Thieves, in court, the terror of London. And they'd even like exaggerate how tall Alice Diamond was. Like, she would literally grow in height. I think she was about 6'1" by the time the last press reports came out. But in her police record, she was like 5'10". I don't know quite what that is in American terms, whether you use that, but she was kind of, they were like putting inches on her every time she was in the news. So there is that kind of excitement in the fact that they're female and they're breaking the rules, they're outside the norms. Whereas I like mafia stuff. I like The Godfather. I love watching that movie. I quite like gangster films, but it's quite testosterone film.
Yes.
It's just blokes going bang, bang. Whereas women doing it, it's subversive, which is fun to write about.
Yes,
And
it
there
has
is
to
that,
be.
yeah, you're outside the norm of female behavior. You're outside the norm of society. If society doesn't kind of know what to do with you, but it's kind of fascinated by you. And also the same excitement for me was the class divide. Like you said at the beginning, it's a time where, the posh people, the wealthy, were still very wealthy, and they had people under their thumb. And they did actually, in terms of how people lived, their environment, their housing, people were exploited and terribly there, living in real slums. So there was a kind of thrill in these women. They couldn't afford to get what they wanted through a proper means, through having a good job and all of that, because they didn't get the education, and they were never going to be given really, they were never going to like be the boss of a factory or anything like that. It was never going to happen. So this was them going, well, I'm going to take that. And there's a little bit of, the English legend of Robin Hood. I don't know if you've heard about Robin Hood and his merry men, and he robbed from the rich and he gave to the poor.
Right.
And Alice Diamond and her gang actually, they stole, but they didn't like charge interest on. So women could get silk stockings or whatever they wanted for a price, but they'd never like make them pay massive exorbitant interest rates. So there was a kind of fairness to it, a kind of sisterhood, which again, I just find, I mean, as a writer, who wouldn't want to write about the Queen of Thieves with the diamond rings that she uses as a knuckle duster? I mean, you couldn't make it up. And actually, well, as it happens, I did make it up, but there are elements of her that are so larger than life, that they're just fantastic. And her whole gang, and it was like a mafia. It went on for decades. Like the granddaughters and the great granddaughters, some of them were still at it and saw thieving in shops as like a kind of a career, which I don't condone at all. But they were like, well, my nan taught me how to steal. I could steal a handbag, or I could go into a shop if I really wanted and buy, and I could not buy it, but I would steal it. And that was their mentality. It's very like the mafia.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing about the women in that age is like, the men had gone to war, the women were left behind. And so they had to be more resourceful. They had to sort of do a lot on their own. And then the men came back, or, and then the women were sort of brushed aside again. So,
Yeah.
it wasn't even just they didn't have an education. It was like they didn't have, no one was going to give the women a job when the men needed jobs. The men were home from war. And then some women's men didn't come home. So then they're fending for themselves. And there's the character of Maud, who has, her husband is gone, and she's got a daughter and a son, and she's doing the best she can for them. And her daughter is one of the 40 thieves, and her son gets sort of involved, even though she doesn't want to be involved. But what choices do they have, really? Right?
Very few. Their worlds were quite small, weren't they? And I love that, again, from a kind of writing perspective of it. I wanted it to feel like choices were being shut down and the pressure was building for these characters. And in some ways, their very community, their world, really lent itself to that, because also, like, in a bad way, for if you crossed Nell and the 40 Thieves, you could be like ousted from your community. There's this idea of, again, very mafia, like, you're going to cross the line, you're not going to be welcome here, and you'll find yourself kind of cast out.
They demand loyalty. There's a huge demand for loyalty, and that makes it sort of feel more like a family, which I think is just also, it's like you said, it's just so interesting. And what a fabulous thing to have discovered, because I've never heard anything about the 40 Thieves. And what a fun thing to have discovered, and to give you such a rich background for for this series. Now, I mean, I have to ask, obviously there's another book coming. Tell us what is the next thing?
So really exciting. So that book is called Queen of Diamonds, and it's kind of coming out here quicker than it's coming out there, because that's just the lag of these things. But basically that's like a prequel. So what we've got in Queen of Clubs, which is, as you said, it's out with William Morrow, it's coming out very soon, is the 1950s, and it's all about clubland. So what I've done with Queen of Diamonds is the 1920s, the roaring 20s in London. So we're after the First World War. How did Alice Diamond, the first queen, set up her gang? And it's all about her backstory. And let me tell you, I mean, if you've enjoyed Queen of Thieves and Clubs, I've really enjoyed writing this, because it's an amazing time, amazing era. And it's a younger Alice. She's not a child. She's a kind of a young woman, basically working in a jam factory in one of those really boring jobs, and trying to find her way. And she's kind of influenced by, there's a legend and a story of a Victorian Queen of Thieves, a woman called Mary Carr, who in Victoria, and she's a real person as well, in the days of Queen Victoria, ran this gang of thieves through London. You can imagine them with their huge long skirts and their fancy hair. And she came from a notorious slum in London called the Seven Dials, which is near Soho. And it kind of ended badly for Mary Carr. So, but what her experiences actually influence Alice. And I'm not going to give it all away, but the two plots kind of intertwine. And so I'm really hoping that readers will enjoy that, because for me, it filled in where Alice had really been in her 20s, in her early 20s, when she was really setting up the gang, because she didn't just overnight become the Queen of Thieves. She had to become who she, this full character. And so that's what that's about.
And her brother is a character in the book too. So I imagine get to learn a little bit more about him.
A little bit more about him. Yeah, that's right.
So
we won't say too much about that. But I love the whole thing about Alice and her brother, and Nell and Alice, is like real families. There are people there you just can't stand. You can't live with them, and you can't kill them. And that's basically and that's basically, like, that's the, if Nell and Alice could speak, I think they'd probably say that. Can't live with them, can't kill them, and that's like real families, isn't it?
It is so like real families, 100%. Well, so I Beezy, do you imagine this as a series that will go on beyond?
Well,
I hope.
Okay. Well, my next book, I'm actually writing about something. So after this trilogy, I've got something else coming, which is mysterious, dark kind of crime, historical, which I'm working on at the moment, set in London, foggy London, of Victorian times, which I'm quite excited about. But I can see there is scope to bring the book on into the 1960s and find out what happens to Ruby. the daughter
Right.
of Nell. So see what happens there. Or I could also there would be room to maybe do a kind of 1930s and Second World War 40 Thieves type adventure. So I haven't kind of written it off, but for now,
it's a trilogy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now.
Well, I love that. That gives us a very manageable chunk to read. And I know I'll be going back for Queen of Thieves because I do want to learn about where Alice came from and how that, what happened pre-Nell. I mean, first of all, I have to say also, I love what they've done here. The book is so beautiful. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. And actually Queen of Thieves is also fabulous. I don't know if you've seen the cover. Should I show you the cover for that?
Yes,
you can
please
see
do.
it there. Yeah.
I can see it. Do you have a bigger one?
Yeah, hang on. I'll get one. Hold on. Sorry, I just have to get up.
Of course. It's so gorgeous. But I think they do a fabulous job. And to me, it seems like you have opportunity to do, you could do a lot of these. So it really feels
this
like,
is the book of the month.
I love that it was a book. I didn't realize that. Well, that makes it easy. I can
oh my God.
I
was so excited about this, let me tell you. But this is a beautiful hardback.
It is beautiful.
And it's kind of like reminds me of, The Crown, that TV show, Her Majesty, if Her Majesty had been a thief. So they're kind of really, they're really playing on that with the jewel box and
the leather gloves. Yes,
I love that.
Are they leather? No, they're silk.
I think they're meant to be like red satin.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Yeah, red satin gloves. But there's also there's a razor blade.
Oh yes, I see that. I love that. Wow. Yes, that says it all. I love that.
They used these, this is Killer Women. They actually did. I'm not aware that they had killed anybody. They certainly did mark people. They cut people.
I'll bet. You don't get in their way.
This was the thing of choice because at the time, I mean, if we're getting into crime, we still had the death penalty in England at that time. So people didn't usually want to do enough damage that people were going to die because you'd end up getting hanged for that. So the razor blade, which in the book we call it a chiv, that's like a gangland slang for razor chiv. They used to chiv each other and do these, stripe scars so that they would mark people, and there was a kind of punishment element to it, but also that you wouldn't get into such, you wouldn't get basically hung for it. So so that was kind of where we were at as a society, and that's the reasoning behind it. So it was like self-defense or attack, but you're not going to end up swinging from the end of a rope, which was a real consideration in those days. The last hanging was like 1962 or 3, I think, in this country.
That comes up in the book too. So it's very relevant.
Does.
So
we're not relevant.
Yeah, you have to read the book to find out. But but this was Beezy. This is so much fun. And I also said to Beezy, I love her name, which is such a fun name. And she told me it's Louise, but that is just the cutest. Beezy.
Thank you.
I love it.
That was my brother called me Beezy.
Really?
Beezy from when I was little, and I just grew up being Beezy. I'm not really Louise, but it is, the name on my birth certificate. But
yes,
that's what everyone calls me. So.
Well, it's a firecracker name too, right? I mean, it's so fun. As an author name, it's fabulous. I've not heard that as a nickname for Louise, but I absolutely love it. And I may steal it for a book, Beezy.
Please do. As long as she's nice, not a killer woman.
Oh, but you didn't want her to be a killer? I would sort of think you'd want her to be
she could be
feisty.
Slightly evil, a little bit twisted.
There you go. Okay.
But with a
that
sweet
sounds
smile.
We don't want her to be too nice. Come on, that's not interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Everybody, this is Beezy Marsh, and you got to start with her book, Queen of Thieves. Then there's Queen of Clubs. Then there's Diamond of...
Yeah, Queen of Diamonds.
Queen of Diamonds. I was like,
after that, I'm running out of royalty. That's why I had to change.
Well, I love it.
Queen of Hearts, but it's too lovey-dovey,
yes,
isn't it?
Right, exactly.
So it doesn't really fit.
It does not. That is so fun. Well, anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, everybody. This is Killer Women with Beezy Marsh, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much.